James catches, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound Bosh. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining.
Away team!
Podcast.
What is up, guys?
Hey, it's Dimitri here.
And Cole. We have another episode of the season recaps for Orlando teams.
On to seeds 10 and 9 in the Western Conference, the New Orleans Pelicans and the Portland Trailblazers. Very exciting stuff.
Pretty soon here, we're going to be talking about teams that are already in the playoffs.
I know. If you've been
That's
patient
so
with
sad.
us, if you've been patient with us, you're about to be rewarded by us talking about teams that actually do have a chance of winning the championship. But you know what? I think these, lesser teams are also fun to talk about because a lot of it is about the future, the moves that they've made, what their trajectory is like. So I think there's a lot of legitimate conversations to be had. Whereas some of these teams that are vying for the championship right now, they bet their futures. There's not much to talk about in the future of some of these teams.
Yeah, it's also varying degrees of interest with these teams, right?
Yes.
I think with the teams we're going to be talking about today, which are New Orleans and the Portland Trailblazers, you reach a new tier of interest in terms of the now and the future. They just seem like much better teams.
Absolutely. Just a much more, dare I say, charismatic roster, especially when you consider someone like Damian Lillard.
Yeah.
Dame and CJ, like the little Splash brothers. You have Zion, who speaks for himself. I guess aside from that, the Pelicans, Drew Holiday is a great person and all, but not much of a character.
I've got some serious Drew Holiday love coming in this podcast.
Oh, I love him too. I'm just saying, is he a face of a franchise in terms of a marketing standpoint? Maybe not. But Zion? Oh, sure.
Anything else we need to mention before we get started on New Orleans?
Oh, yeah. One last thing. So viewers of our Washington Wizards podcast or listeners, I just wanted to let you know there's been some groundbreaking news in the week since we've recorded that. So I've updated my statistical model. Prior to the news of Bradley Beal saying that he will not be attending Orlando, the Wizards had a 0.0001% chance of making it to the finals. Unfortunately, that has dropped to 0.000000002% after the news. So, Washington fans, it's not impossible, but I wouldn't look forward to it, and I am sorry for your loss. I really wanted to see Beal play some games. It's pretty sad all around, actually.
I just want the viewers to know that Dimitri has been wanting to let that joke loose for days.
It's been prepped. It's been written in my journal. I drew it on my body like in Memento so that when I woke up, I would remember to say it on the podcast. And finally, I got a chance. So, thank you.
Yeah, that was very important.
Thank you for seeing the floor.
Very important.
Without further ado...
Yeah, let's just get into it.
Yeah, without further ado, we shall introduce Seed 10 in the Western Conference with a record of 28 wins and 36 losses, the New Orleans Pelicans.
And what better day to start than the NBA draft lottery, where they had a 6% chance, the 7th best odds of winning the number 1 pick. And as fate would have it, the most deserving team, the New Orleans Pelicans, won the rights to draft the best college player in recent memory.
It's funny, the New Orleans Pelicans, a few years ago, they win first pick and draft Anthony Davis, who becomes one of the best power forwards of his era, and still is. And then they draft Zion Williamson, who becomes one of the best power forwards of his era. I'm wondering if the Knicks could use some of the Pelicans' lucks, and maybe they could actually field a 5 power forward lineup that could do some damage.
Okay, first of all, it's funny that they get compared to each other so often, Anthony Davis and Zion Williamson, when they play the same position, but could not have more different body types.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you look at old Anthony Davis pictures when he's Kevin Durant style skinny.
It's a Mario and Luigi kind of situation.
Oh, for sure. No, more like Wario and Waluigi. Okay, let me hit you with this, though. This stat blew my mind. So, college basketball has been tracking BPM since 2010-11. Zion had a 20.1 BPM season in his 1 year at Duke, which is the best season since they've been tracking BPM. Second best season was Anthony Davis at 17.24.
Wow.
Almost 3 points higher.
That's amazing.
That's insane. That's like Wilt Chamberlain style breaking a statistic.
That's like going from being like a nobody player to, if you're a +3 BPM, you're like a borderline all-star.
Yeah.
I mean, college BPM's a little different, but it's like going from decent role player to like an all-star.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Just on a higher level. So you're going from college legend to college god, basically. Hercules to Zeus.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's insane. There shouldn't be that big of a separation between the 1 and the 2 spot. Just a couple other quick hits here. Zion in college, he shot 68% from the field. 3.9 stocks, steals plus blocks. 22.6 points on only 13 field goal attempts.
Unbelievable.
Unreal. And this is maybe the most insane. His offensive rating was 133.1 points per 100 possessions, and his defensive rating was 87.4 points per 100 possessions.
And for those who are uninitiated, because we know there are going to be some listeners that aren't aware of basketball stats, a lower defensive rating is always better.
Right, and those stats taken together mean that when Zion was playing, they outscored the other team by 45.7 points. What the fuck?
Yeah, if you let them play 100 possessions, the other team would be blown out by 46 points every single night, basically. So, yeah, Zion Williamson was the story of the draft. I do want to, remember, they did draft some other players, and this will go into their trade moves and free agency, which was also just stuttered with amazing game-changing news.
So, July 6th, the Pelicans trade Anthony Davis to the Lakers. In return, the Lakers send Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, the rights to the number 4 pick in the 2020 draft, a 2021 first-round pick, a 2023 first-round pick, and a 2024 first-round draft.
And just so you know, this 2021 pick is either 9 through 30 protected, or it transfers to 2022 unprotected.
Right.
So that's really strong. 2023 is a pick swap. And then 2024, if they're not happy with that draft, they can just say, no, I want your 2025 pick.
Right.
So they have all these extra, hinges built into these picks that make them even more valuable than just your run-of-the-mill, oh, this is a lottery protected first rounder. And they got cash. And they got cash from the Wizards somehow, too, in that trade.
There were a few other teams involved with this in order to just make the salaries work, I think.
Yeah.
I left that stuff out because it's just not that important.
Oh, the Wizards getting cash? What could be more important than that? They need it.
Oh, man, that's awesome. How are we going to renovate the arena, man? We need that $1 million.
Exactly. So they traded with Atlanta as well.
Right.
During the draft, Atlanta really wanted DeAndre Hunter at number 4.
They shut him down for workouts.
Exactly. They knew that they wanted him, and they pledged to trade their number 8 and number 17 first-round picks to the Pelicans, which turned into Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker.
They also added a second-round pick and a 2020 top 10 protected Cleveland pick to that trade. The Cleveland pick was essentially adding an extra 2 second-round picks. There's just no way that Cleveland wasn't a bottom 10 team next season.
Absolutely not.
So that's just going to be a 2021 and a 2022 second-round
And just
pick.
so we don't forget, because we respect all players in the NBA, whether or not they actually end up spending minutes in the NBA, they have the draft rights to Marcus Luzada. They got it at number 35, plays in the NBL. Probably will never step foot in the continent, but, it's worth saying that they have him.
Early second-round picks generally have a similar value to late first-round picks in terms of player return. So, yeah, I mean, if you can get a very early second-round pick, that's always good.
Yeah. And so we'll talk about Jackson Hayes and possibly Nickeil and some of these other assets they've gotten.
Well, just real fast though, what did you think? I mean, I'm guessing we're both in agreement that Lakers return was just insane, right? It's a huge win for the Pelicans.
Huge win for the Pelicans' future. Anthony Davis was never going to do anything with the Pelicans. The Lakers get the benefit, but
Davis is probably signing with Chicago this offseason. So.
Yeah, we all know that. We shouldn't probably say it on the pod, but we've heard from a currently suspended ESPN reporter that it's a guarantee. Yeah, so after the draft, where they draft Hayes and Walker, they trade for Derek Favors, who's on an $18 million expiring contract with a couple second-round picks. They sign Nicola Melli, who's, let's say, older, a MILF. Is that the proper terminology in away team terms? A MILF for 2 years, $8 million. And my personal favorite free agent signing for them was JJ Redick on a 2-year, $26.5 million deal. Their shooting coaches are already great. They have a lot of these players that have shown the potential to shoot either in college or through flashes, but have just had issues on the Lakers specifically. I mean, Lonzo and Brandon Ingram both had their disappointments. And this year, the gamble seemed to pay off.
Yeah, so I was a big fan of the Melli signing. Everyone that I was reading was saying he's been one of the best players in the EuroLeague for 6-7 years. He's a stretch 4/5. That seemed like something they needed alongside Zion Williamson. He just seemed like the sort of guy who could come in very early on and be a rotation player. JJ Redick, that man's just gonna be good for any team.
Yeah.
Every team needs a marksman. Name a team that he wouldn't make better.
The guy will deserve to be making these $5 to $10 million contracts up until his early 40s, I swear, just because of how much he knows about his role specifically and how valuable that role is in the NBA nowadays. Such a great investment. The Sixers made a huge mistake letting him go, and the Pelicans made a great pickup.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, in terms of performance expectations, there's a lot of hype around it because of Zion, right? And of course, in the Summer League, Zion bumps his knee against someone else.
9 minutes into the first game.
9 minutes into the first game. He's out the rest of the Summer League. There's a shroud of mystery surrounding his injury.
They were really cryptic about it.
Then the preseason, again, a lot of Zion injury, hidden messages. Basically didn't play the first part of the season. So that was very disappointing.
I had forgotten that in December, he became vocal about wanting to play.
Yeah, they were very cautious with him. Because I think they've seen the writing on the wall with earlier prospects that didn't turn out because of rushing them back from injury.
Yeah. No, look, of course you want to be as cautious as possible, but they were just so cryptic about whether he was going to come back that season at all, when it was going to happen. And then I remember in January just being floored by the news that he was going to be playing that week.
Yeah.
I just thought it was very strange the way they handled that whole situation.
It was. But even discounting Zion, I think in terms of performance expectations, you wondered, does the gambit of trading AD, who is future Hall of Famer, for this kind of pack of misfits that never really amounted to much, couldn't even make the playoffs with LeBron, could they pair them with these gritty, well-seasoned vets? I mean, Drew Holiday, JJ Redick, and Derek Favors. None of them are mind-blowingly amazing players, but they're all in the upper middle tier of veteran players I think you can get, especially at the budget the Pelicans were looking for. Still, though, I looked at the stats that various websites were putting out, and being in the playoffs was still far from considered for them. They had a 37.5 over-under in the Vegas books compared to 46.5 for the Spurs, who would have been the 8th seed in the preseason over-under, and 538 gave them a 1 in 3 chance of making it, which is actually, I think, a lot more optimistic than a lot of other websites did. So not an impossible task, but I think the big questions were, besides Zion, who will likely be injured for much of the season, how can Drew Holiday and these youngsters with this weird set of abilities that hasn't fully coalesced into something that works, how good can they be?
Yeah. I think everyone was excited to see this team without Zion too, because you would get the answers to questions about non-Zion players, right? These guys that New Orleans picked up from LA had promising young careers, but hadn't done anything and hadn't won anything. So what's going to happen with them?
Right. To be fair, the preseason performances looked incredible. That first game against the Raptors, the opening night game, they looked pretty solid. But to, I guess, segue into the regular season, it's hard to paint it as anything but pretty rough. You get the start that Zion is disqualified for the first few months. They lost their first 4 games. Shortly after that, they had a 13-game losing streak. So their first 28 games, they had 6 wins and 22 losses. To be fair, the 13-game stretch was mostly against teams that were over 500, but they did lose to Phoenix, Detroit, Orlando, Brooklyn, those kinds of teams, which definitely did not help. So what happened? I mean, from what I saw, Jrue Holiday chose like the worst time to have a mediocre beginning of the season. His shooting was down. Well,
it's important to note that after that 6-22 start, they go 11-5.
Yeah, that's true. It jumps up even before Zion comes back. Yeah. They do have a huge jump in their rolling net rating from those lows.
They looked at times really good while Zion wasn't there. One of the things I thought was really interesting in researching this pod is looking at the breakdown for certain themes in the season and seeing, for instance, which players were good before and after Zion came back, right?
Yeah.
Because for some players, like Lonzo Ball, he was terrible before Zion made his debut.
I mean, he didn't have his best, weapon. He did become kind of a knockdown shooter, though.
Yeah, but that comes after Zion debuts. Lonzo's stats before January 22nd, 30 minutes per game, 12 points on 39% from the field, 35.5% from three.
Okay, not knockdown, but...
No, it's not too bad, but it's like Lakers level of Lonzo Ball. 52% from the line.
I mean, that's Lonzo.
But even the assists weren't that good compared to what he'd do later. 6.3 assists. Post Zion, 35 minutes per game. His minutes per game up by 5 minutes. 13 points, 45% from the field, 43% from three.
Yeah.
66% from the line, 8.4 assists. That's a totally different player.
Absolutely.
That's an efficient player, an expert passer.
I mean, imagine how much more space he has to work with, both as a passer and a shooter, with Zion taking so much gravity, right?
Yeah.
And the lineups. Another thing that's not talked about enough is the Derek Favors injury was catastrophic.
When did that happen again?
It was just early season around the same time as the Zion injury.
That's right. They were starting Hayes.
They had Hayes and Jahlil Okafor basically playing, and most of the 13-game losing streak coincided pretty much perfectly with the Derek Favors injury. They had to run some of these lineups that you look at and are just disasters, you know? They're just putting out the best players besides Derek Favors, and there's no real defensive center because Jahlil Okafor can't do that. Jackson Hayes is
great for a highlight volleyball block. Terrible for switch team defense.
No. But his highlight dunks are almost on Zion's level, man.
Yeah, so...
He's crazy.
Okay, so post Zion, let's just get into this. I want to talk about Brandon Ingram, too. Post Zion, they are 11-9. Offensive rating jumps from 18th to 11th in the league. Defensive rating, I thought this was insane. It jumps from 26th to 8th. And net rating jumps from 24th to 7th.
Wow.
I wonder now, after talking to you, if the defensive rating jump is also attributed to Derek Favors coming back.
I think it's what I think me and you both like to call the Pels death lineup. You have Lonzo Ball, Jrue Holiday, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and Derek Favors playing those roles in those orders with an insane plus 26.3 net rating over 230 minutes, their most played lineup. And extraordinarily, they scored 10.5 field goals over opponents per 100 possessions on 0.8 fewer field goal attempts, which is just hard to even fathom. And I think it's just this combination of Brandon Ingram and Jrue Holiday, who are both very well-rounded. They can play make a little bit. They can do ISO plays. They're both very good ISO players. So Jrue Holiday is in the 88th.
They're also heady passers.
Yeah. So Jrue Holiday's in the 89th percentile as an ISO player. Mm-hmm. Just high risk, and then he can pass out to any one of the shooters on the wings. Ingram is 72% in ISO. The Ball and Zion combo is plus 15.2 over 430 minutes just because of this insane transition potential. And Zion is 71st percentile on post-ups.
You know what's crazy about those lineups too is going into this, I was thinking that the Brandon Ingram ISO play type would be increased in New Orleans just because he was having to carry the offensive load when Zion was out.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the case.
No.
His ISO percentages, in terms of like the frequency that he ran that play, are about what they were in LA. What's really up is his catch and shoot. He's getting passes from the heady passers in those lineups.
Right.
Like Zion, who's an underrated passer.
Right.
I think Derek Favors is actually a great passer personally. That really popped out to me in the film.
And then having a 39% 3-point percentage for Brandon Ingram on over 6 attempts versus the 33% on less than 2 attempts he had on the Lakers is just an unprecedented improvement that surely makes him a much larger threat than he was before. One thing about Derek Favors also is that his counting stats are not flashy, but he is a plus-minus god. So his plus-minus on the court is plus 6.1. On and off the court, plus 10.9. So that's how much better he makes this team. Even though, he scores 6 points a game, nabs a few rebounds. So, you look at the big defensive plays and it's like Zion fucking volleyball smacked this ball across the court. But Derek Favors is positioning himself in such ways that kind of plug the leaks before they even happen.
My default assumption with this team was to think Derek Favors is just going to be too slow for them.
Yeah.
They have so many really fast young players that he's going to hold them back from being the transition monsters that they both are and should be. Mm-hmm. But he just doesn't. I mean, he just makes them better.
Yeah, and I think part of that has to do with what you said about him being a sneaky passer. So this lineup, this death lineup, pretty much everyone on it is capable of doing great passes. And another insane statistic that I found, they get 13.3 more assists per 100 possessions while averaging only 1 more turnover per 100 possessions.
That's wild.
So they're not only are they passing a lot and getting a lot of good assists, they're doing it accurately. And so everyone is in kind of this flow state because they have so many options. They can cut, they can do a transition play, they can ISO out to a catch and shoot play. The only downside really is that as ball handlers, Drew Holiday and Brandon Ingram are not amazing on pick and roll, but that's made up for the fact that Zion and Derek Favors are quite good role men. Yeah. So, it's a balance.
In fear of making this podcast way too much about Derek Favors, which I think we already have, but is awesome. As a guy who loves playing pickup, there are people that are really good at sneaking into perfect places, especially big guys. They can kind of sneak in and they're quick-footed, and next thing you know, their defender has turned around for a second and they're in the paint waving their hands for the ball. Derek Favors is that guy. Mm-hmm. That guy sneaks into the paint and gets these easy buckets like it's his job, Yeah.
So just one other lineup I wanted to touch on just to show how valuable Zion Williamson is to this team. Basically, if all you do is take Zion out, move Ingram up to the 4, Holiday up to the 3, and swap JJ Redick in, which is, I think it was their most played lineup before Zion came back from injury. Basically, throw the best guys on the court and see what happens. It was a -1 over 146 minutes. It's not really surprising to see why. Derek Favors isn't exactly going to be an interior threat the same way that Zion is. You don't really have cutters. You have a lot of dudes that can do stuff around the perimeter, but it's not like it's giving JJ Redick the open shots that he'll need by distracting his defenders on the inside. So it was an interesting thing that they had to do, and who knows, maybe Alvin Gentry could have pushed out something a little bit better, but I thought it was interesting that these 5 solid players had such a middling performance.
I mean, to me, that just speaks to the gravity that Zion Williamson pulls when he's on the court.
Yeah. Also, they gave up 8.5 free throw attempts per 100 more than they got, which indicates that their defense was just not of a high quality. They weren't baiting fouls and they weren't avoiding fouls very well, which is not a good combination.
Right. So I want to get into some bubble stuff, but just real fast, I had a little Brandon Ingram bit I wanted to do. We talked very briefly about how different this season was than Los Angeles, right? Like, if you look at the breakdown, they just look like a totally different player.
Yeah.
You're looking at his true shooting being up to 59% from 55%. Assist rate up 7 percentage points. Rebounding percent up 2 points. His box plus minus literally flips It goes from -2 to 2.4.
Yeah.
Like, that's an insane growth.
And on increased usage, too.
Yeah, and on increased usage. So I was asking myself, how on earth is this possible? And you know what the answer is? They literally gutted a player like you would gut a computer and rewired him. His play types totally changed. Like I mentioned earlier, his percentage of spot ups go from 13% to 20% in terms of his play type frequency. That comes at the expense of post ups. Like, they took out all of the inefficient plays that he ran and replaced them with efficient plays. And then they put him in different places too, on that same theme of replacing inefficiency with efficiency. His 3-point frequency goes up from 12.9% of his shots being three-pointers in LA to 35.2% of his shots. That's an insane increase.
Yeah.
And those are all long twos.
It's necessary. And that's a coaching thing, too. I mean, that just shows a kind of bad coaching from the Lakers.
Yeah.
Coach who will not be named. But we know he's still out there doing his damage to some poor team that we might have already talked about.
And just the last way that his style of play was totally changed is his position.
Yeah.
In LA, he played 73% of his minutes at the 3, 13% at the 4, and 13% at the 2. In New Orleans, he plays 62% of his minutes at the 4, 38% at the 3, and then even 1% at the 5, which was a disaster. They were minus 40 in those minutes.
Okay, yeah.
Which surprises no one.
No, that's pretty terrible.
But that's the difference between thinking of him as a wing player and a forward.
Right.
You know, like,
yeah.
I just thought that was interesting. Like, can you think of a player in history that has gone through, like, that drastic of a change? It's pretty nuts.
I mean, Siakam kind of went from being just a nobody, but he was always playing the similar kind of role, right?
Yeah. Well,
He's just grown into more things, but yeah, the absolute explosion, because you saw it in Brandon Ingram. You saw that somewhere.
Yeah.
Even before it came out in New Orleans. But I'm just very happy that they were able to activate it. I mean, it does say something about the coaching staff, whether or not it's Alvin Gentry or the shooting coach or whoever, that they were able to just transform him into such a good player.
And that they were able to convince him to undergo that transformation. That's, a lot of guys are really reluctant to do that.
Yeah.
You know,
very headstrong.
Props to Brandon Ingram for being open to that change. And props to the Pelicans coaching staff for being able to convince him to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, should we talk about the bubble?
Yeah. I just realized at the beginning of the pod, I said I would make some Drew Holiday love. Just quick 10 seconds on Drew Holiday. That guy's so fucking good. I was watching the Pelicans-Lakers because I was interested in matchups, right? Who's guarding LeBron? Who's guarding Zion? Who is Zion guarding? Drew Holiday takes the LeBron matchup there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was watching Portland versus New Orleans for a little more game footage. Drew Holiday takes Damian Lillard there.
Wow.
What versatility. I don't know. That's so good. And to be guarding these players, he picks them up at the midcourt line.
Mm-hmm.
He's guarding them midcourt. He's pressing them all the way, and then he's also performing on the offensive end. That guy's a boss.
And that plus Lonzo, who's also just like a future, like all defensive guard, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Is a deadly combo to have in your backcourt. And I think this is one thing I did want to talk about, was there were these trade rumors about Drew Holiday in the middle of the season, right? And I was thinking, well, you know, the Pelicans really do have this kind of, where do we go? We have so many young players. We have a few older players. I think they made the right decision. Keep the mentors, because clearly whatever they're doing, it's working. And like, if you can shape Lonzo Ball into a Drew Holiday type player, that's a massive achievement. And I think that is a great goal.
Yeah. And I mean, they were finally starting to come into their own right around when the trade deadline happened. Like we said earlier, even before Zion came back, they were on a win streak.
Yeah,
they're not a win streak, but they were winning games, you know?
I'm pretty sure their highest rolling net average over the course of the season was just by a hair a few weeks before Zion came back, when they were just on a tear. I think when they had beaten Denver over Christmas and stuff like that, they had like a really good run of games.
You don't trade your veterans at that point. There was some talk
Oh, yeah.
about other teams being interested in Drew Holiday. I seem to remember Denver and Miami rumors.
Yeah.
But you never took them that seriously because they were doing so well.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, here, in 4 games in a row, they beat Portland, Denver, Indiana, and Houston. And none of the games were particularly close.
Right.
So, and that was without Zion. So clearly they were capable of great things. So yeah, the bubble. The moment everyone's been waiting for. I think everyone has these guys marked down as the biggest threat to the Grizzlies. And if the season hadn't been suspended, a lot of websites actually had them as the outright favorites because of how easy their schedule was. They still have the easiest schedule, but with only 8 games and with some of those games in their schedule being against the Clippers and the Jazz, it doesn't give as much room to mess up. That being said, it's hard not to see them come within 4 games of the Grizzlies.
I think 538 has them making the playoffs.
Yeah, they're 45%, and the Grizzlies are at 37%. So it's pretty
Right.
close. Before the season restarted, the Pelicans were at something like 60%.
Still, though, having higher odds than Memphis when you've got to beat them twice to get in is pretty impressive.
But Memphis, Sacramento, and the Spurs they're all in the same fight, you know? None of these games are going to be guaranteed, even if the numbers show that they are such. I will also add that the Pelicans have one of the worst records against teams above 500. 9 wins, 27 losses. Versus below 500 teams, they're a solid 19-9.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a numbers game.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to figure out what to do with those stats. I think they're important. It's sort of like looking at home and away records.
Mm-hmm.
What are you supposed to do with this? I thought maybe we could end with just like a couple questions that we have.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking about is, the starting lineup is so obvious and so good for the Pelicans. Like, what do you do with the bench?
Right.
You know? In the playoffs, you really want to ride an 8 or 9 man lineup and really tighten things. And the Pelicans have so many good players that you'd hope to play minutes, right?
Yeah. Not all of them have shown their best sides this year, but I think that they do have a deep enough team that, there's even a lineup which had Kenrich Williams and Jackson Hayes that was plus 18 over 90 minutes. So I think they have a pretty solid bench that they can slot in here and there.
Yeah, the lineups that I'm really curious about, and I think would be really good for a bench unit, is lineups with Zion at center. Because they rolled out Zion at center for 100 possessions or so.
Yeah.
And they were 99th percentile in points per possession.
Wow.
At 121 points. And 98th percentile in terms of opponents' points.
Well, they just better hope that Zion plays all their games at center, because I don't see how else,
It's difficult because they're very strict with his minutes allocations, right?
Or they were.
They were and are. Even in some of the later games, they would take, especially in the first quarter, they'd play him for about 6 or 7 minutes and then, like clockwork, take him out.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to see. I don't know if they were as judicious about that minutes allocation in the third quarter.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But what I was curious about, the big lineup that I'm curious about is Redick, Ball, Holiday, Ingram, Zion. Because I just feel like that's your 5 best guys. And that reminds me in terms of shooting, overall caliber of player, speed, playmaking. It reminds me of the death lineup for the Warriors.
I feel like if Zion was a better defender, that would be great. But I think right now, having Derek Favors there is more valuable than having JJ Redick on the outside when they have Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball as more or less capable shooters. But if they were
they played lineups with Zion at center and Brandon Ingram at the 4.
Yeah.
So they've experimented with this. Do you want to know how many minutes that lineup has played?
How many?
The Redick with the starters?
How's that?
0. Not a single minute.
It's weird.
That the fact that it has such a low amount of minutes makes me think that maybe they're holding that in their bag.
That's true. That's a very good point. Yeah. Because this, I'm looking at this lineup right now that was Redick with Josh Hart, Drew Holiday, Nicolo Melli.
Some of the Melli
Zion
lineups are
Williamson,
very good.
And it's plus 19. So yeah, throwing Redick in there might be the way to go. I do want to say, though, as excited as I am to talk about their bench, here's the reality. Everyone knows that the NBA is very excited about Ja versus Zion in the play-in tournament, right? That's going to get a lot of eyes.
So awesome.
And you know what they want even more than that? Is they want Zion versus LeBron in the first round. Here's my thing. Even if the Pelicans do it, they lost all 4 games in the regular season against LA. So, like, how exciting of a series would it really be?
Yeah, and it's just, I mentioned it a little bit earlier with the defensive matchups between LA and New Orleans. They've got a lot of very awkward fits.
Yeah.
It's just a very awkward matchup. Like,
yeah.
Davis guarding Zion is very awkward.
Yeah.
Drew Holiday guarding LeBron is very awkward. And in some situations, it can be alarming and effective, but I think over the course of a 7-game series, it just is unsustainable.
It's strange because the Pelicans have what I would consider, like, that death lineup is probably the best balanced lineup in the NBA, or at least in the top 5 best balanced ones, and just in terms of, like, how many different ways can you attack the basket and how many different ways can you defend the basket?
Yeah.
But then you come up against these teams that have these, like, LeBron's playing point guard all of a sudden. How do you deal with that? And I think that's what's going to be tough for them. So we'll see what happens. Do you have any other predictions for the bubble?
Yeah, we'll just hit you with a quick high post take. You mentioned Ja versus Zion. What if Memphis signed LiAngelo Ball?
Ooh.
And it was LiAngelo versus Lonzo?
Oh, shit.
What do you think about
Battle
that?
of the century. I think, I don't think that would end well for Memphis, but who knows, man? Who knows?
Who knows, dude?
Who knows? And then just to touch on the future, I mean, pretty much we've already talked about this, but just to give a quick summary, clearly an extremely bright future for this team. My biggest question for them is, how much do you value these veteran players that you have on your team, especially like the 3 core ones, Drew Holiday, JJ Redick, Derek Favors, with the cap situation next year? How much are they willing to keep these guys on? For how much? These guys are awesome for them. Will they just bite the bullet and keep giving them these fat contracts, or what will they do? I think they should stick with the mentoring vet and rookie system because they only have these 3 guys that have significant experience.
Dude, bring them back, man. They're good.
Yeah, their next oldest guy is Jahlil Okafor, and clearly he's not teaching anyone shit. So, no offense, but...
Yo, no Jahlil slander.
Jahlil is probably
Zero
not gonna be a
Jahlil
Pelican,
Okafor
but...
slander. Yeah.
And do they keep Alvin Gentry? That's another question I have.
I thought he actually did a pretty good job this year.
I think
I think that's kind of a hot take.
It is. He looked bad in the beginning, but once Zion came in, I think it helped. And him, like, discovering that really good lineup and just, like, going balls deep with it, pardon my French, really worked out for the best and made them look very good. But I still think they've lost a lot of winnable games throughout. I think they can do an improvement. I wouldn't be surprised to see a shakeup in the next year or 2.
Yeah, I'd just be sad about it. I think he's shown he's good with player improvement. He's experimenting with interesting lineups. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of teams that could use him. I think if the Pels just have... I think
he's a top 30 coach in the NBA.
He's
That's the way I look at it. Like, do I think you should... My criteria for whether you should be fired is, do I think you're a top 30 coach in the NBA?
Yeah.
If I think you're a top 30 coach, you deserve a job.
I don't think he should be fired. I just think that if the Pels want to take advantage of this young talent like OKC did almost a decade ago, Alvin Gentry's not going to be their coach for that run. And I think they should start thinking about that. But yeah, that's my hot take.
So that's the Pelicans for you.
Pardon if it went a little long, but, very interesting team. I think a lot of people are interested in hearing about them.
Sweet. We'll take a break and then do Portland.
All right. See you guys in a bit.
All right. We are back. We are here talking about the Portland Trailblazers.
The Blazers. Blazers in more way than one now, right? Now that Oregon's got their legal ganja, dude.
Dude, you're the first person that has ever made this joke.
Really? What about the Portland Weed Blazers?
Did you know that the Denver Nuggets
are
called the Nugs because...
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
And the Phoenix Suns... No.
And the New Orleans Pelicans.
And the Clippers, it's because those are the guys that trim the weed, right? It's all coming together.
Hey! Hey,
Yeah.
hey.
Now we're getting down to it.
Okay, I think the offseason 2019, we're going to be able to breeze through this in comparison.
Draft picks, they got Nazir Little at number 25, who a lot of people...
Steal at 25.
A lot of people said he was a steal because, he was expected to be drafted earlier. From what I've seen on the court, unless it gets better over the next few years, looks like an end of first round, like typical guy who... He could go either way. Plenty of good players end up looking not that great their first year, but he's become a necessary rotation piece.
Right, but just in terms of what the fall and draft status looked like at the time, I mean, all the mock drafts were placing him in the lottery.
Yeah.
Kevin O'Connor, 12, NBADraft.net, 12, The Ringer, 9, respected people were saying he should be around number 10.
Not to mention the luck of drafting someone at his position the year that is a year of nightmares at the position that he was drafted in.
Yeah.
They also got Jalen Horde and Moses Brown as undrafted 2A players. Not really much more to say about them other than they exist.
No, I got something to say about them.
Oh, go
Fuck
for
you.
it. Fuck you. Yo, fuck you, Jalen Horde.
I'm sorry. We'll bleep that out.
F him. F him for no reason.
Shut the front door.
Shut
Okay.
the front door. Okay.
Free agency.
Yeah, free agency. Okay, they actually had a lot of free agency moves.
Yeah.
Probably the most earth-shaking one was trading Evan Turner for Kent Bazemore to the Hawks, which ended up being a massive loss for both sides. They expected to get mediocre players, and they got barely playable people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Kent Bazemore... I want to save my Kent Bazemore talk till when the season actually starts.
Sure.
I'd say they did the Kent Bazemore trade as an addendum for the trade that they would do next, which is Harkless and Myers Leonard for Hassan Whiteside and the Jimmy Butler mega trade.
And I think that one is the one that we should probably focus on the most, because that was probably the most decisive trade that they made. And I think in a lot of ways, even though Hassan Whiteside has been a perfectly serviceable center for them, losing Maurice Harkless at that position and his defense, and losing Myers Leonard, even though he wasn't an amazing player, did they get the value back from Hassan Whiteside that they needed?
I mean, the way you've got to think about these two trades is they turned Myers Leonard and Mo Harkless into Hassan Whiteside and Kent Bazemore.
Yeah.
So you got to ask yourself, are the priors better than the afters?
Right.
It's hard. They're tough players to compare.
The calculus is very difficult when you're talking about these obscure role players who can shine one season and then just lose everything the next year. It happens all the time.
Yeah, and Mo Harkless had some years where he was really cold from three in the playoffs. That killed them. So did Al-Farouq Aminu, who they let walk. I honestly thought the letting Aminu walk was a bigger hit for them than losing Harkless.
Absolutely. Other minor and slightly less minor signings. So two minor signings was Anthony Tolliver on a vetman.
I hope you're not going to say Mario Hezonja was a minor signing.
Minor signing Mario Hezonja on a 2-year
Dude,
vetman.
Croatian J.R. Smith?
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Did you ever hear the story about him and Lionel Messi?
No, what happened?
So apparently he was a prospect in Barcelona playing 8 minutes a game or something.
Yeah.
One of those really highly touted Euro players, but he just wasn't playing a whole lot of minutes, sort of like Porzingis. And some reporter asked him, have you gone and seen Lionel Messi play yet? And he said, Lionel Messi should come see me play.
Oh my god. Yeah, Mario Hezonja is kind of he reminds me of the Harlem Globetrotters did their wacky shit, but they could never pull it off properly. Because that's him, basically. He's always trying to pull Harlem Globetrotters moves and then just completely fumbling the ball, trying to do between the legs passes and just knocking it out of bounds off of himself somehow. Mario Hezonja,
But you want him to be good so bad because he does that stuff?
Yeah, I know, he tries really
hard.
You
want him to be so good.
But it's just dude, get your fundamentals down first. One of the bigger signings that they had was Rodney Hood on a 2-year, $12 million contract, second-year player option. Good for him, considering he sadly ruptured his Achilles after having a nearly 50% from 3-point season, which we'll get into later. And then two biggest moves, I think, because
let's not forget the Pau Gasol signing, though. 1 year minimum, and then promptly cut before the season starts.
but stayed around as kind of like a player coach, which I thought was a nice thing for him. I think that's...
Overstayed his welcome?
I don't know.
They were kicking him out the door and he just stuck around?
He was like, hey guys, is craft services still around even if you've been away from the team? Like, am I allowed? And they're like, yeah, sure, come on, pal, you're not a bad guy. But I would say the biggest free agency moves they did weren't so much with new players, but extending both Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum on a supermax and a regular max contract each.
Chumps.
Just a couple chumps. Yeah, these bums, they're just signing the worst possible contracts ever. Actually, the Damian Lillard supermax is surprisingly movable, I guess, as far as supermaxes go, because it only goes up to $200 million for the 4 years. And the CJ McCollum, bit of an overpay, but considering the synergy that him and Dame have and the fact that there's a lot of teams that will give up a lot for CJ McCollum, I think it's pretty savvy, even though it makes balancing salaries a little difficult.
Yeah, I mean, the CJ McCollum contract is not going to hurt you that much because if you're trading CJ McCollum, you're trading him hopefully for a player of his caliber. Therefore, you're trading him for matching salary, right? You're going to trade him for one of those guys in the 30 to 35 million range.
Yeah.
Where the salaries are going to match up perfectly and the trade will be easy.
The only risk is that him and Damian have that synergy and that friendship that even if there are so many people who dream of having CJ McCollum on their team as a huge improvement, I feel like the Blazers are going to be so hard-pressed to not trade him, but they might have to, considering...
Well, just real fast, I just want to say this about the contracts. One thing to keep in mind is CJ signed till the 2023-2024 season, Dame through 2024-2025, where he will be making $54 million. That's insane. But in 2023-2024, they will be making a combined $85 million.
Yeah, and they'll be in their early to mid-30s at that point.
And guards do not age well in the NBA.
No. And if Damian Lillard was more of like a Chris Paul, like brilliant floor reader, just like can do all sorts of shit. I mean, I love Damian Lillard, but there's so much about him that is explosiveness and just unpredictability, agility. And, I mean, CJ McCollum, I could see staying valuable. $33 million a year is valuable, I don't know. At the time, though, if that's what it took to lock him down, might as well give your fans the pairing that they've been expecting. I really couldn't have imagined how much crazier last offseason would have been if they had split up even Dame and CJ, too.
Yeah. And look, what Neil Olshey, the president of the Trailblazers, did is the right move.
Yeah.
You pay your stars.
Yeah.
You can't overpay a star. I think Daryl Morey said that, and it's true.
And I just wanted to kind of get into performance expectations, because we pretty much covered everything they did. Yeah. I mean, they made the Western Conference Finals last year. They did get swept after leading the Warriors at halftime in every single game by double digits, I believe. I can't remember if it was every game, but I think at least 2 of the games they were leading by like 15 points at halftime. Really unfortunate ending, considering they didn't have Durant. But, you know, assuming that it's the same team, basically, you're going to be competing for a mid to high seed. Probably not the 3rd seed like they had last year, because that was a bit of a fluke. But I think most predictors had them as a playoff lock or as leaning into the playoffs. I mean, they're the 9th seed, so really we can't say that it was that off. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it was pretty off. I think most people would have thought this team would be in the 4 or 5 range.
Yeah, I mean, and so their goals, I think, were develop pieces like Anthony Simons, especially Zach Collins, considering the promise that he showed. I think last year's playoffs, he was a pretty promising piece. And Gary Trent Jr. as well, who came into his own near the end of the season, but is yet another young piece that a lot forgot about. They had other pieces that they ended up trading. And then the important thing, I think, is continuing to rehab Nurkic until he's ready to come back and anchor the 5, because without Nurkic, the team's ceiling is so much lower.
Yeah.
I mean, you're relying on Hassan Whiteside, who, don't get me wrong, he'll put up the numbers, but he won't get you the wins.
So the season starts, and the
first few games are promising.
And then it just all falls apart.
Yep.
It's just injuries and inconsistent play from role players.
I think the hardest my heart hurt for the Blazers was an early season game against Philadelphia that went down to the wire. And there's a play that they drop for Anthony Simons in the corner, and he hits a 3 and puts the Blazers over the lead with 0.4 seconds left to go. And everyone's like, yes, thank God, it's a home game. Anthony Simons is like gonna be our new Messiah, like this kid that they found in a fucking random YMCA gym, so good. And then Furkan Korkmaz, with the 0.4 seconds, just drills it and sends them out. And then after that, I think their morale was permanently shaken. And that was a 6th game of the season.
I remember that game. It was terrible. It's just injury after injury for them in the beginning. Zach Collins on October 27th.
3 games in.
3 games in. Rodney Hood on December 7th. Both of them were playing unbelievably.
Yeah.
Zach Collins obviously in a much smaller sample size.
But this was supposed to be his year. He had shown a lot of promise, and this was, if all went well.
He started those 3 games.
They had the confidence. He was shooting 43% from 3 in a very small sample size, of course, but like, if he could sustain even 37% from 3 at that position while maintaining like the defensive ability that he had been building towards, that would be a really dangerous piece.
Yeah, I'd say to add to those injuries, with Rodney Hood especially going out, you need other players to step up, and Kent Bazemore was terrible for them. 7.9 points per game on 34.7% from the field, 32.7% from 3 in 25 minutes. And he's supposed to be like a starter for that team.
I'll do even better. Anthony Tolliver, 3.9 points per game on 36.8% from the field and 33.7% from 3.
I love that you're hitting me with the Tolliver stats, man.
I wanted to, just make sure. He played 17 minutes a game for them.
That's a role player.
Hazonia played 16 minutes a game and at least scored 43% from the field and 33% from 3.
Hazonia is a god.
Hazonia...
There will be no Mario Hazonia slander. He actually was pretty good for this team.
Yeah. There will be no more Hazonia chatter whatsoever.
Oh, you wait, dude. I've got some Hazonia stuff.
Yeah. I think the big move that everyone remembers was when they signed Carmelo on a non-guaranteed contract on November 19th after a particularly dire stretch. They lost the first 3 games with him, but then they started getting a decent string of wins. And I think people kind of saw it as a reclamation story for both Carmelo Anthony and the Blazers. And even though the advanced stats, which I admit I haven't looked too deeply into play types or why, because, his counting stats, his 3-point percentage is like 38%, he's shooting a decent clip. His defense is Carmelo-esque, not great, but whatever. But even then, despite all that, he was still a very important part considering how thin their rotation was and how the next best player was, you name it. Wenyen Gabriel, Caleb Swanigan. I don't even know if these guys were on the team or traded later.
Wenyen Gabriel was not on the team at that point.
Right.
You should know this. He was traded.
He was a king.
Also, no Wenyen Gabriel slander out.
Skal Labissiere, for example, though, was on the team and was not good.
So then January 21st is an important date. They finally get rid of Bazemore's shitty ass and Tolliver. And a pair of second-round picks for Trevor Ariza, who is amazing for them. We mentioned him in the Kings pod. He shot almost 50% from the field and 40% from 3.
49 and 40, played with absolute hustle, played like his fucking life was on the line.
Played like he had been playing 20 games for the Kings and not giving a shit.
Yeah, the old Vince Carter effect. I'm going to play as terribly as I can before you guys relocate me. Also, Vince Carter, hope you are enjoying your retirement.
One thing I did find interesting is after the trade, you'd expect the defensive stats to improve for the team.
Yeah.
They don't. They get 4 points per 100 possessions worse on defense, but they do get 6 points better on offense. Yeah, so listen, you lose Rodney Hood, Kent Bazemore's not playing well. That's a sizable chunk of your 3 minutes. Getting Trevor Ariza was a Band-Aid for that loss, And he stepped into that role very well.
Yeah, I think what Portland's executives, their big mistake this offseason was undervaluing their role players and not realizing how thin some of their positions were. I mean, Zach Collins is not like a player that's supposed to be irreplaceable. But immediately he showed that he was nigh irreplaceable on their team. They had to sign, Carmelo Anthony just to fill in some of the minutes at that position. And you had Anthony Tolliver, who's he cost them that Philly game. He tore Anthony Simons' soul apart by letting Furkan Korkmaz get that open 3.
It's really the forwards that they didn't do a good job of populating their roster with. I think the guys that they did sign, and some of it's dumb luck. Yeah. You can't account for Bazemore having that bad of a season with you.
Or Rodney Hood tearing his Achilles. Like, that is so sad.
Yeah, he was doing playing so well.
That was probably the best basketball he's played in his career.
After he signed his qualifying offer with Utah that season, Utah offered him like $80 million, and he was like, I think I can get more.
I deserve more.
And he signed his qualifying offer, then got a minimum with the Cavs, and then traded. Finally looks like he's playing well again and tears his Achilles.
It's really sad.
It's a tragic career.
Yeah, shooting 49.3% from three and just being like a low usage, high efficiency player. Like, any team would love that.
We also mentioned on the stream the other day, shout out to our Twitch streams at Away Team Pod, that he has the name of a guy that should be the best player in the league.
Rodney Hood? Yeah, he should be a star.
He's killing it on the name.
Rod Hood?
Rod Hood.
He could be a great porn star name too.
Okay, let's get into players that people actually care about.
What about Damian Lillard, for one?
Damian Lillard. Insane season. What I think's really crazy about him, if you look at his stats for every year of his career, is he just incrementally gets a little bit better every season.
Right.
And that's just happened 8 seasons at this point, and it's led to him being just a monster.
I mean, consider this. Last year, he was shooting 8 threes a game and making 37% of them. Now he's shooting 10 a game and making 40% of them. That's massive increase in efficiency. His true shooting percentage, .619, which is elite, to say the least.
The advanced stats just jump off the page for this season.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. Like, PER is a career high by far.
Just to make everyone know, the away team does not officially sponsor PER as a legitimate advanced stat, although some of our staff members may enjoy it.
I don't mind PER. I think it's good for differentiating outlier statistical seasons.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's got serious flaws, though. And a 26.2 PER is very high.
Yeah, that's really impressive, especially, for a guy whose primary thing is scoring and then some assisting.
The guy, like you said, true shooting career high, 61.9, which is insane. Career high in assist percentage? He's averaging 7.8 assists per game this year. That's a whole assist higher than he did last year.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Led the league in offensive win shares and offensive box plus minus. He was the best offensive player in the league. I don't think that's hyperbole. Do you?
No, I don't think so either. When pretty much every major advanced statistic agrees upon it, I'll have to look at whatever 538's Raptor has.
It does feel a little ridiculous to say he's having the best offensive season in the league when Harden's scoring like 37 points per game.
Sure. And Harden's on the team that's winning more. But
we did it.
We did it. And I think just to look at some of the stretches, I know you have a more condensed one. My stretch that I wanted to look at was early January to before his pre-All-Star injury, which was like a week before the All-Star game. He was averaging 34 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 8.5 assists on 49% from the field, 45% from three, and 89% on 8 free throw attempts a game. And in 6 of those 21 games, he scored more than 40 points. He beat his career record with 61 points on 11 out of 20 from 3 against the Warriors. I mean, it was just amazing.
I'm not going to spit out my stats. They're like pretty much the same, except a little higher because I focused on the peak of that stretch.
Yeah.
I will say what's really impressive about that stretch is a lot of the stretch happens against very good teams. They beat Houston, they beat the Los Angeles Lakers, they beat Utah, they beat San Antonio, they beat Golden State.
Hey, Golden State, best team in the league, right?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, so just an unbelievable stretch. 2 50-point games and 1 60-point game. And then the groin injury happens, and it sort of derails their season.
I mean, it doesn't derail it as much as you would think. Just a little bit. Quite a bit. So in that stretch, they went 4-2. But they do get to run a lot of Gary Trent Jr.,
right,
who became a really impressive player for them, just a knockdown three-point shooter. Before that, he had barely played any minutes from them. And he ended up being like their second half of the season Anthony Simons. So Anthony Simons went from shooting 50%, 40% first 10 games to 38, 32 the rest of the season. Whereas Gary Trent, who never played, started scoring 14.5 points per game on 45% from three after March 2nd on. Like about a week, but still, he showed a lot of promise.
Yeah, and he was playing a lot of minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, this sort of goes back to the question of why is your roster so thin that you have to play Gary Trent Jr. sizable minutes when Dame goes out?
It's a big question. And I mean, if you look at their trade deadline moves, they got rid of some dead weight. Kent Bazemore, Anthony Tolliver, and 2 second-round picks to Sacramento for the Ariza, Gabriel, Swanigan trade. And then they traded Scott Labissiere and cash to Atlanta for essentially just a salary dump.
Yeah.
So I think that was valuable in that it got rid of players they didn't need. If Ariza was going to Orlando, that trade would look incredible right now.
Do you want to get into some bubble stuff? I've got some lineup stuff that has to do with the Ariza absence.
Sure. If we're going to do some bubble stuff with the lineup, I just wanted to quickly talk about what I call the depression lineup, which played 46 minutes in the 3 games before Zach Collins was injured. It was Hassan Whiteside, Damian Lillard, McCollum, Rodney Hood, and Zach Collins. So what they envisioned would be their starting 5 was plus 25.7.
It's the saddest part
It's
is that
so
it was
sad.
It speaks to the idea that if this team hadn't had to deal with as many injuries as they had, maybe they would have actually been really good. I mean, they wouldn't have been plus 20 good, but...
No, but that's a huge difference. And hopefully, so let's go into the bubble, because I think one of the biggest issues with analyzing the Blazers in the bubble is it's going to be a completely different team.
Yeah. And I think when we were first starting to think about doing this podcast, we were really excited for their chances because we thought Trevor Ariza was going to go. And we were thinking, oh wow, this is the Trailblazers team that we should have seen at the beginning of the year when they were deep at the forward spots and deep at center and deep at guard and they had all these players that they could play. But it's funny how, once again, you lose one player and it all unravels.
Yeah. In a lost episode, we had Portland Trailblazers as our most interesting team going into the Orlando bubble, partially because of their game advantage. The fact they played more games gives them a percentage advantage in terms of win percentage. Some math shit, basically. They benefit. And because of this Ariza, this newfound strength that they were playing with, Damian Lillard having the will to carry the team on his back. And then a lot of stuff has happened since then that has really reduced their chances. Chief among them, if you haven't seen the graph that we posted to Reddit showing the team's strength of schedule as it was supposed to be prior to the season suspension compared to what it is now. Although the Trailblazers aren't the team with the hardest schedule, they have one of the highest increases. And of all the teams that are competing for the Western Conference 8th seed, they have by far the hardest schedule. It's really, really unfortunate. They have the 4th largest increase in schedule strength, which is the worst among teams that are fighting for a space in the playoffs. Their schedule was about in the middle beforehand. It wasn't quite as easy as the Pelicans. It wasn't quite as hard as the Grizzlies. But now it's about as hard as the Grizzlies. It's about as hard as a bunch of other teams. So that's going to make it really difficult for them.
Yeah, but they still have that one game advantage by nature of being 1/1000th of a percentage point ahead of the other teams with the same record.
That is true. Just to list their opponents real fast, just to give you an idea. Celtics, Nets, Mavericks, Nuggets, Rockets, Clippers, Grizzlies, Sixers. So if you look at it that way, it's a tough schedule. But it's not like absolute hell.
Listen, all of those games are going to be must-wins.
Yep.
You want to get into some lineup stuff? We touched on
Sure.
this earlier. The most interesting thing about the Blazers is what are they going to do with the forward slots, right? They fluctuate from being so deep at these positions and then suddenly so frail at these positions so fast. And I think in the bubble, there are a lot of questions about who's going to start at the 4, who's going to start at the 3. The answers to these questions are dependent on each other in certain scenarios.
100%.
they did come out and say they're probably going to start Collins and Nurkic together, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone expected them to roll those guys out into the starting lineup immediately.
Yeah, you'd think Whiteside would have a position there.
Well, you just assume that players that haven't played in a year are not going to play in the starting lineup immediately.
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting. You alluded to this earlier, the Zach Collins at the 4 minutes in those 3 games that he played. Somehow they ended up playing 100 possessions with Zach Collins, which is pretty impressive considering he played 3 games. He's like plus 27 in those 97 possessions.
Yeah, I mean, he was looking awesome in the beginning of the season.
Yeah,
it's really such a shame. It didn't even look like that bad of an injury when it happened, but it was bad enough to take him out for an entire season, clearly.
You talk about the depression lineup that you mentioned earlier. Lillard, McCollum, Hood, Collins, Whiteside. That's perhaps going to be similar to what they're going to be starting in the bubble. Except for you slot Nurkic in instead of Whiteside and then replace Hood with...
Gary Trent? Maybe?
Well, let's get into that next. Let's stick with the 4s for now because I think that's just... You got to focus in on these positions independently, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. Because some teams, they have like a depth chart and it's like, oh, the next 4 on the rotation is pretty similar to this guy. It's not like a huge difference, but... On the Blazers rotations, like each of these players has such a dramatic difference in their strengths and weaknesses, I think.
Right? I mean, during the same interview segment that Terry Stotts said he's going to start Collins and Nurkic, Nurkic said he's going to play minutes at the 4. Okay, so now you're saying Nurkic is going to play minutes at the 4. You've already got to play Collins a lot at the 4.
Yep.
Carmelo Anthony has to play minutes at the 4. I think he played all of his minutes at the 4 this year.
He played 86% of his minutes at the 4 and 14% at the 5.
Yeah, so Melo's playing 86% of his minutes at the 4. His minutes at the 3 this season were insanely bad. He was minus 33 in those minutes, which is really, really bad.
There's no way he's going to be able to defend other threes.
He's just too old to be able to catch up with athletic young forwards. So you have to play him at the 4 also.
Right.
And then there are guys on the roster that were getting play at the end of the season, like Mario Hezonja, who played 74% of his minutes at the 4. You have all these guys who assumably need to play at the 4, and it seems unsustainable that you're going to be able to fit them all in there.
Hezonja's going to have to switch down to the 3, or have Gary Trent switch up to the 3, have just like a smaller thing, but I mean, I don't think Gary Trent's going to be that good of a defender. That's the problem. It's a lot of issues. It's surprisingly thin team.
It's a weird team where you have a lot of options for putting players in certain positions, but none of the options are good.
Exactly. They don't go well together.
Yeah, let's get into the 3 minutes. We talked about this with Hezonja. After Ariza goes out and without Rodney Hood, you're talking about Carmelo Anthony, Hezonja, Gary Trent, and maybe Anthony Simons as possible players to play the 3. Melo, like I said, he's played 16% of his minutes there and is minus 33.
Not good.
Not to mention the fact that in 2018, when he was with OKC, the last time he was in the playoffs, OKC ran him through pick and rolls, switched Donovan Mitchell on him, and did that every time he was on the court. He was unplayable.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he's going to be exposed very quickly. I think he's going to be just like a extra minutes guy for them.
Yeah.
I think all they can hope is that Nurkic and Collins are able to play better than Oladipo played after he came back from his injury. Which, just a reminder everybody, Oladipo is apparently playing at Disney.
Yeah, fuck him.
Yeah.
I just released the video and added him.
Yeah, this is just a postscript to the video. Oladipo's actually playing.
The video, of course, of 10 most interesting players not going to Orlando.
Yeah. So, I mean, but besides
let me just finish on the 3.
Sure.
Hezonja, minus 32 in 322 possessions at the 3. Terrible. Trent was minus 7 in 1,000 minutes at the 3.
Okay, that's the least bad option.
Well, the interesting one to me is Simons. He's plus 6 in 326 possessions. 99th percentile in terms of offense when he's at the 3, which would be the best offense in the league by far. Absolutely awful in terms of defense when he's at the 3.
I mean, he's 6'3".
And he's really skinny, you know? He just... What, you're gonna make him guard LeBron James? Good luck.
No,
you know?
no, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, their defense is worse than the Wizards when he's out there.
The problem is,
the 3.
and they don't have the lineups to hide him at all.
No.
That's, I think, partially why he has struggled so much since the beginning of the season, you know?
I think they're probably going to end up playing Trent there just because he presents the best combination of size, shooting, and defense out of all of the options.
I think it's going to be a Trent at the 3, and, I mean, God.
You're going to see a lot of Simons.
What are they going to do with Nazir Little?
He's not going to play.
You think he's worse than Mario Hezonja?
Yes.
God, maybe you're right.
He wasn't playing at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Hezonja was playing like 20 minutes a game for this team at the end of the season.
You know, people meme on the Knicks, but the Trailblazers have 6 power forwards on their roster right now.
I had the same thought while I was doing research for it.
So, what the fuck? Can't they, like, pretend like Caleb Swanigan got COVID so they could sign, like, I don't know, a random player that's in Europe?
It's so strange, too, just how rigid they are with playing certain players at certain positions. I was looking at Nurkic, his career play-by-play stuff, to see if he'd ever played power forward. Because I just thought it was so odd that he was saying he was going to play it. He played 1% of his minutes at power forward in 2018-19.
I just don't get why they can't play him at the 4 with Whiteside at the 5. It just seems like it should be doable.
Yeah,
right?
And then Collins at the 3, and Melo at the 2, and
Anthony at the 1.
And Wenyan at the 1.
Sounds like a great lineup to me.
No, point guard Mario Hezonja at the 1.
Well, maybe they should hire you as a coach. One tough pill to swallow, sorry Blazers fans, but this is a fact. This has been proven by the brilliant statisticians, mathematicians, and semioticians, physicians, all the 538 people. Damian Lillard has one of the worst regular season to playoffs drop-offs in performance. I think second only to DeMar DeRozan. I've said this in the last few podcasts, but if these teams are treating these 8 games as if they are playoffs, which they kind of are, it's a similar situation. It's like, you lose a game, you're fucked. You have to keep up. And so either Dame goes crazy and does what we love him to do, or he does what often happens and his output decreases. It's funny because he's widely known as being like this really clutch performer because of those crazy threes that he's hit to like win series, but overall, he's cost his team in the playoffs.
If you isolate for the last second of series clinching games, his points per 100 possession is insane.
Yeah. It's just the rest of the time, he's a little bit of not that great. That being said, I wouldn't put it past Dame to do some crazy shit.
I think the most interesting thing about Portland is, sure, there are the issues in the playoffs with Dame, but no team that we've talked about yet has a takeover guy like him.
Yeah.
We can at least see the blueprint for Portland making a run in the playoffs.
Right.
Because we saw it last year.
The difference, it's like, compare him to someone like Bradley Beal. They had similar insane streaks of games in similar time frames, like January, February, except Dame's team actually won a lot of those games that he was going crazy in, whereas Bradley's team lost all of those games.
Yeah.
So it actually, he's helping
and
his
they
team.
beat, like we said, good teams.
Yeah, solid teams. He's no joke.
I just see a blueprint for them making a run into the playoffs and perhaps even further if Dame can get as scorching hot as he did during the regular season.
Yeah, it's just that it's them and the Pelicans against the Grizzlies. It's possible that the Suns or Spurs or the Kings do something, but realistically looking right now, it's a Pelicans and Blazers race for the knockout tournament, and the strength of schedule difference is very considerable. I mean, it is going to be very hard to bypass that, and especially considering the Pelicans are going to have a fully stocked team with very little rust, and as we talked about, just really solid lineups, whereas the Blazers don't have any of that. And they're a great team, don't get me wrong, but this has been a tough season for them. I'm not even sure if they would be a better challenge to the Lakers than the Grizzlies would. What do you think? Or the Pelicans, either one.
I just think that the teams that end up challenging good teams as 8 seeds tend to be the more veteran teams. And since that's the case, I'd have to go with Portland.
Yeah, I think Portland would be the one who I root for. I mean, Memphis would be fun.
It's also the teams with the best player.
Yeah.
In the playoffs, you just need one guy to get you buckets when it's really difficult.
Unless LA already has like a battle plan to shut down Dame.
Which the guy that would have guarded him is out now, Avery Bradley. So.
That's true.
Although they do have Danny Green.
Yeah. So I just wanted to touch on the future because I do think it is a bit of a scary prospect for them. Dame and CJ, one of the most recognizable combos, the like mini Splash Brothers, whatever, but they're not champions. And Dame's going to be 30 next season. CJ will be 29.
MILFs.
They're MILFs. They're fucking banging MILFs too. But with this roster that's been constructed for them, if Nurkic comes back looking great, it could be a completely different story. I just find it difficult to see the end of their peaks being as promising as Blazers fans may hope. And I don't know if trading CJ is going to become a serious thing next year. If once again they disappoint, or it's just looking like they're going to be like a 7th or 8th seed. And the fact is, like, their young prospects just, there's not that many that look great, you know?
I mean, the issue is all of these questions can only be answered with the NBA bubble playing out.
Yep.
You know, like, if they play really well, then of course they're not going to trade CJ. They're probably not going to trade him anyways, you know? It's their chances of making the playoffs were so low. It was an injury-riddled year. I think if you're management, you're looking at this and you're saying, let's just write this one off and come back healthy next year.
It's true. We'll see what happens next year, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I think that's it for me. So thanks for listening to our Pelicans and Blazers review. Sorry if it was a long one, but there's a lot to go into.
Yeah, we'll do the plugs. Check us out on YouTube. We'll have that in our Twitter bio.
We just did what we call an overtime podcast. So a quick 20-something minute long one that you can use to entertain yourself, where we just kind of shot the shit. But we're going to keep doing these for some more in-depth analysis.
All right, and
for next week, it's going to be Brooklyn and Orlando, our first Eastern Conference team since Washington. Very exciting.
Yeah, it'll be our first 10-minute pod.
Yeah, exactly. There will be like about 5 minutes to talk about and then 5 minutes of jack shit. Great. So yeah, thanks for listening. We'll catch y'all later.